I'm going to let, and who is coming in? Welcome, whoever it is. We're now 3 persons.
I don't see anybody else.
No, she's probably got the video and the audio clears, but we are now beginning to record it. And this is the Academia Bessarion 32, part 1, because we're going to use 2 screen sharings. And what we're doing this time is to talk about the City and the Book conferences, especially the 10th one, which we've just held. And I will now take it to the next slide, and it always is obstinate about moving, but it didn't this time. Our very first conference was held in 2001 in Florence's Certosa, and it was on the alphabet and the Bible. It was during the time when the European Union was being very Masonic and deciding that Europe was not Christian. And instead, my argument was that European culture was based on the alphabet and the Bible, neither of which are European. They come from outside. And it was a wonderful conference where we had so many scholars. We had Jewish scholars, we had Russian scholars, we had Icelandic scholars, we had Irish scholars, we had Spanish scholars, and they all were relating their work to each other. And at one point we realized that the Jewish Bible was being vocalized because which is vocalized, was so much easier for non-Arab to be able to read. As a result of that, the Masoretic scholars around the Sea of Galilee put in the vowels in points above the letters and so forth, because they were trying to convert the Khazars. And at that point, Cyril and Methodius are in the Crimea learning Hebrew. The Masoretic vocalize Hebrew, which they then, when they go back to Rome, realize they can use the same kind of system for creating a new alphabet for the Scandinavian languages, to convert the Vikings and so forth up near the Baltic Sea. So that was really an interesting conference. And then we did another one in 2002. And this time it was held at the Accademia delle Arti del Disegno in Via O San Michele. And this was on the manuscript and the miniature in Tuscany. And we found we had almost as many women's manuscripts as men's. Egeria's manuscript is in Arezzo, and Hildegard von Bingen's beautiful manuscript is in Lucca. And there are many Brigittine manuscripts in Florence and in Siena and so forth. And so we also, at that point, were talking about illuminated Brunetto Latino manuscripts and Dante manuscripts. And I was able to gather up quite a lot of the major Brunetto Latino scholars. And that was splendid because we were sharing our slides and so forth. Back then we were still using slides. Now we use JPEGs. We then did a concert in the Gabinetto Vieussieux. Maurizio Bossi had us do a conference on Florence's English cemetery. And he brought together scholars who were interested in the Russian burials, in the Polish burials, and so forth, and gave it the title, Eloquent Silence, Words on Stone. Our fourth conference was on the Savage Landor family. And that was splendid because the descendants all came. we were burying the bones from, they'd been thrown out of Portisante up by San Miniato of Henry Arnold Savage Landor, the explorer and the writer and the painter and the inventor, and also his uncle. We brought them to be beside Walter Savage Landor's wife. And we brought together the descendants and the very noble counts, and one of them a general, Negroni Bentivoglio, and the American descendants and the English descendants together with a lovely chamber concert at the top of the cemetery. And we gave talks on them at the British Institute. Then in the fifth conference was the one that the Americans asked that we do, because we have over 100 Americans involved with our cemetery. And that again was very interesting, especially with the artists like Hiram Powers and Emesa Hewins and so forth. And scholars gave papers on those areas. And then we decided we didn't always have to do our conferences in Florence. So the sixth conference we held in Norwich. And at the beginning, I was always needing a lot of funding and paying people's travel. But in the end, we realized we didn't have such funding and we could do our conference with almost no money at all. I did fly to Norwich and we stayed in a bed and breakfast, but Carrow Abbey, which was probably where Julian had been as a novice, a Benedictine abbey, and they allowed us to have the conference for free on their beautiful premises with the abbey ruins. And we put together a series of very interesting papers, Julian of Norwich, texts and contexts. And Malcolm White came and gave his readings of his sonnets between the papers. And Malcolm is a theologian, a poet, an Anglican priest, a motorcycle rider, and a jazz player. And he looks like something out of Tolkien with a white beard and so forth. He was splendid. And then the seventh was again coming back to the Accademia delle Arti del Disegno, where we did a study day on Dante Vivo. And again, many interesting papers. That one was entirely in Italian. And I was able to put together the proceedings as we had with the others. The eighth was on Elizabeth Barrett Browning and the sculptors, and we held that here to honor Amalia Chadi Dupré, who did 2 medallions for us of Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Robert Browning, which we have placed on our wall, because Robert had changed Leighton's design of the tomb, and she no longer had her portrait. So we did the portrait, and we also did her signature with her full name, because Robert had only put EBB on her tomb. And on Robert's portrait, we only put RB. And then we did another conference in Monte Amiata. An Orthodox monk who had painted, drawn for me a very beautiful icon of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. He gave me a relic of St. Cuthbert, part of the bone and part of the coffin, which he had been given at Durham. And I felt I should not be the owner of these icons. And at Monte Amiata, there is the most beautiful cupboard where once had been the Codex Amiatinus, which then Napoleon had brought to the Laurentian Library. And it is filled now with reliquaries. So at a ceremony, they placed my relic of St. Cuthbert in this beautiful cupboard, which is like the cupboard that Culfrith illuminated in the Codex Amiatinus, which is also like the cupboard in the tomb of Galla Placidia in Ravenna for the scene of St. Lawrence and so on. And we also had some very interesting papers given at that conference. And then finally, the 10th, on Florence and India, which we held in Florence and in Delhi using Zoom, which is a splendid way of saving costs and making international speakers accessible to each other. And the Delhi part was held in the Red House, named after William Morris's Red House, by a companion of the Guild of St. George. And this talk will be discussing that conference. And this was the setup we gave. I gave the introduction, and these were the papers that followed. And we will go into those in more detail soon. And these are the search terms I sort of suggested that people use. We are very much influenced by the companions of the Guild of St. George. There were 4 companions involved in the conference. And so we were talking about John Ruskin, but we were also talking about Dante and Florence and Gandhi and India and so forth. And this was the proposal that we gave to the companions of St. George at their annual general meeting. And Arjun designed this. And I held the conference the first day on my birthday, 14th of April, by having us go to the Museus Tibet, which was, its loot comes from the wealth that the Tibet family made in India. And it is fabulous, but as we were walking around, there was a Lebanese family with us. And the father and the children were saying to each other, everything here is about war. It's all armor, knights, military weapons, and so forth. And then we also met in the English cemetery, and I had placed on each tomb connected with India a lotus design to indicate that, as we had done with the American conference, with the then form of the Stars and Stripes, fewer stars, and so forth. And then following that, we actually blessed all of the Russian tombs, putting on their tombs the icon of Christ with the book from Mount Sinai. To give a brief history of India and why I might have been concerned about this, my father was an editor for the Times of India in the 30s and covered Gandhi's Salt March. He was present, and he describes it as being history very quietly being made. And these are his books, Peasant and Prince and The Tragedy of Gandhi. And he also, in his autobiography, which he wrote with my mother, talks about his time in India. And then there were the BBC broadcasts with Nehru and Lord Irwin and my father and other people. And I can remember as a child, glued to the radio, listening to the moment when India became independent. And here we see Lord Mountbatten and Nehru below him. It is a hierarchy. They're making it very clear who's in charge. And this will be the story that will continue. My convent school, Anglicans, the nuns also taught in Nainital, up near the Himalayas. And the mother foundress, who was really splendid, she founded the order on Red Lion Square. She really was a socialist as well as High Church Anglican, Oxford movement, friend of Baron von Hegel and so forth. And she sent her nuns by way of Florence to India, instructing them to study Florentine art. And they brought back these albums, which I now have, of Bregi and Alinari prints. Yesterday I was here with my granddaughter Aurora in the Bargello. This is the sculpture which John Ruskin showed the schoolboys who applauded the sheepdog. But actually in the Mugello, the sheep still are this breed that you see with the horns, and they trot them out for the Presepio at Christmas. And this is the Indian tomb, which we based this conference on, and its restoration. And we're going to find some very interesting things. The sculpture was actually polychromed, it was painted, but unfortunately the restorer wanted to restore it that way. But Belliati said, no, he's got to be white rather than coffee colored and so forth. The story of India, it was meant to begin with the East India Trade Company, but quickly it became very military with various armies, the Madras army. These were private mercenary armies and working for great profit. That was the Indian office building. Initially, the Anglo-Indians, as also the Anglo-Florentines, mixed. And the Anglo-Indians adopted Indian culture, married Indian women, and so forth, until the disaster of the Meerut Indian Mutiny, where General John Hersey really is in error. There is a madman who comes, who shoots an officer, and in retaliation, many people are killed. To punish this, there's a mutiny about the bullets for the Enfield rifles being a mixture of pig and cow fat, which are animals not acceptable to either Muslims or Hindu. The story of Rani Lakshmi Bai is tragic but brilliant. She at first supported the British, and then they betrayed her. So then she worked for Indian liberation, and she fought on horseback with a sword with her child on her back. She died of her wounds. The British did raise her children, but saw to it that she did not continue. And the emperor of India, the Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, he is forced to live in exile in Burma, and his sons are killed. And here we see the scene of the people being shot in cannons. I now have to quickly open the gate for my granddaughter, and I'll be back.
Go gently.
She can get in, and so forth. Then Lord Lytton, who was present at Elizabeth Barrett Browning's funeral, who was very much in love with Isa Blagden and she with him, but he doesn't marry her. He then is the first Viceroy of India and presides over the most terrible famine. And following that, this photograph, I just can't believe, it's so terrifying. The little babies and the skeletons. Then there's the 1919 Amritsar massacre of civilians by the British. And then the 1947 partition of India and Pakistan. And meanwhile, the great gems, which are now going to be part of the coronation, are like this emerald girdle of Maharaja Sher Singh, end up in the Royal Collection Trust. We talked about Museus Tibet, his tomb, well, the tomb of his father and his sister were here, and then they were exhumed and taken to the other cemetery. But this was their wealth from India. And our cemetery is filled with East India Company people. Christopher Webb Smith, with his funds from India, is able to fund the building of this church, which was filled with pre-Raphaelite paintings and the Holy Trinity Church. It's now Valdensian, and all of the paintings have been thrown away as idolatrous. Walter Savage Landor is much in love with Rose Aylmer, an Earl's daughter. She goes out to India at 18 and dies at 20. And he writes this poem to her, which is on her tomb in Calcutta. And these were the extraordinary tombs in the English cemeteries in India, with these strange obelisks and so forth. And that's the information about Rose Aylmer, and this is the poem. We also have Walter Savage Landor Dickens, who is Walter Savage Landor is his godfather. I remember his Boythorn in Dickens' novel. His father sends the boy out to India at 16, and he never sees his parents again. He dies in debt and of malaria. And to me, that's the sending of a child like that at 16 is just to serve in the army. It's atrocious. And this is his tombstone in the cemetery. And meanwhile, Walter Savage Landor has an unhappy marriage with the daughter of a bankrupt Swiss banker, Julia Savage Landor. These are the children painted by her lover and so forth. And we also have Richard Temple Grenville and the Maharaja of Travancore in Kerala. You get these kinds of scenes where we have Temple Grenville buried with us. And this is Isa Blagden. She's part East Indian and part Jewish. And this is a vista from her house, Bella Sguardo, which Elizabeth will put into Aurora Lee. And here is Robert Lytton, Viceroy of India, who doesn't marry Isa because she's mixed race. And this is his wife, Edith Villiers, who raised her daughters as suffragettes. And this is Joseph Garrow. We had a very fine paper by Nicholas Haverley, whose father is Parsi. He's a great Dante scholar, who gave this paper because this boy here, whose mother is an Indian princess, he translated the Vita Nova into English the first time. And this is his English father and his father's sister who raised him. And he received the best education in England, became a JP, Justice of the Peace, and then also came to Florence in retirement and died here, his daughter marrying Thomas Adolphus Trollope. And Sir James Annesley writes this huge, thick book on the diseases of India, which we've already seen killing Walter Savage Landor Dickens and Rose Aylmer. And this tomb is interesting because it's a cenotaph. Anne Dennis Johnson died in Meerut in India and is buried there. And her husband buries her father here. We do need to get this ironwork restored. It was damaged in the storm. And I was hoping to raise the funds for this restoration work with this conference, but I haven't exactly done that. And then we had this wonderful serendipity of a Japanese woman scholar showing up at the cemetery just the week before the conference, looking for obelisks and pyramids, because she was finding obelisks and pyramids as those strange shapes that we saw for Rose Aylmer in Indian cemeteries, and which were seen by the architect, I don't remember his name, who then comes home to England and builds these monuments as follies in English gardens, such as at Stowe House. So we get this sort of cultural movement and also this cultural international scholarship about this. And her paper is lovely. And so this is the Maharaja. He's only 20 when he dies in Florence. His handlers have so controlled him. He's seen Queen Victoria twice. He always writes his diary most dutifully, saying everything is good. And then he suddenly just gives up and dies. And there's great consternation. What can they do? Because cremation is not allowed yet. Shelley was cremated, but there was a fine row about that. But he must be cremated at the confluence of two rivers. And somehow they get permission to do it. And after the cremation, they also build the monument. But it's not built by Indians. It's built, he is Hindu, but it's built in Muslim style by British Army people, British Army architect and so forth. And that was my bibliography for that part of the paper. And then I loved this paper. This is Sriram Rajasekaran. He is a medical doctor. And he gave me this proposal about how books link to books. And he calls it the magical spell of a book. And he says of the Gita, if someone were to read the Gita at some point in their life, it may not be at the same time that the teachings of the Gita really enter into their heart. For this, that is, the Gita, to enter into you, to occur to you, is a preordained moment in your life, which is called the Gita Muhurta, the magical moment when it makes itself known. It is in such moments that books work their magical spell. In a liminal space and time, later you emerge transformed. And then he talks about how such a spell happened in the lives of Ruskin, Gandhi, and Proust, and his own. And so he asks us to travel with him. And I love this comment, this way of seeing books. It's not the way scholars are allowed to see books, but it's the way we really read them. And he talks about Roger's book on Italy, which was illustrated by Turner, and which was given to John Ruskin in 1832, the book for his birthday. And he says that the book decided the entire direction of my life's energies. And he says the book was the first means I had of looking carefully at Turner's work. It was responsible for his Turner insanities, and that the book determined the main tenor of his life. In 1904, Mohandas Gandhi is seated on a train in South Africa. A friend hands him a book to read on the journey. Gandhi later wrote, I determined to change my life in accordance with the ideals of the book. The book was Unto This Last by Ruskin. Gandhi called him Great Ruskin. The book gripped me, brought about an instantaneous and practical transformation in my life, and so forth. And he speaks of Tolstoy and Ruskin and so forth as the people who have made a lasting impression on him. And then I love this because Siran talks about a peanut cell. And this is what John Ruskin was doing. He was undoing classism. And here Siram is talking about somebody who is gentle and kind and efficient, and relating that to Ruskin and Ruskin's sense of morality. And then Tolstoy also having that same sense. And Proust also continuing with this fascination with Ruskin et la religion de la beauté. And so he talks about...
You're frozen.
Yes? Right. He talks about beyond age, language, nationality, culture, and all such differences that lie like a gulf in between. There comes a point where you are connected directly with the writer through the book. The thoughts that have been floating formless in your mind get a shape in his sentences. The fleeting ideas and sensations that you once had, and what remains now of them is but a vague remembrance, gets cemented in the pages for posterity. All that you have wanted to say but never found the right words to do so are succinctly put together by him. At this moment you join hands and climb the hills with the writer to see the glorious horizon, the fantastical expanse of your mind. He leads you through the attic that is your brain and shows you things that you never knew existed. Old, long forgotten drawers are opened. Intentionally suppressed letters are dug out. The spine of each book is touched. Some textures are felt only now. In the end, the writer places his own book in the attic and leaves you for you to continue your walk alone but never without company. And may a book work its spell on you. Thank you. He wasn't able to deliver his paper because there were elections going on in his province in India. And as a medical person, he was on duty. But he had sent this, and it's exactly the experience that we have been talking about with neuroscience and metaverse and alternative universe. Buckminster Fuller spoke of the cup as the extension of the hand, the wheel as the extension of the leg, and the book is an extension of the brain. It's a memory system, a communication system, and so forth. And then we went into Sir Nicholas Mander's talk on Ruskin and mountains. And this is Nicholas Mander's beautifully restored Kelmscott house, Alpen, which he and his Swedish wife have worked on for many years. And his talk was lovely. It gave many images, which I haven't put into this slideshow, of mountains and of churches, spires, mountains as holy places, and so forth. And I should have left that until the afternoon, but I used it to follow on from Siram talking about climbing the mountains with books. And following that, we had Joseph Garrow discussed by Nicholas Haverley, whose father was Parsi. And then 2 papers on Queen Victoria by Domenico Savini in Italian, and Gabriella Del Lungo, who teaches English at the university in English. Then we went for lunch in the Cascine by the Prince's Tomb. And remember, the Cascine is where Shelley wrote the Ode to the West Wind. And then we had a very interesting paper, see if I can advance it, on Oscar Wilde and the Prince's Tomb. And that was given by Rita Severi. I will be with her in Bologna on Friday for the presentation of a book on Elizabeth Barrett Browning, our translation. She was pointing out that Oscar Wilde saw this tomb and loved it for being polychromed, where the prince is dark. Unfortunately, the Italians have turned him into an Englishman and made him white, which is what the military handlers were also trying to do. And it's a shame that he was not allowed even to live with his mother in the palace. He had to live with the British military personnel in a bungalow in the garden while they were educating him to be an English gentleman. And one of the tombs in our cemetery is quite lovely because the brother writes in his will that his 2 servants must be compensated for the fact that he took them out of their culture, their language, their families, and that they must receive a pension and serve his brother, but with the sense that they have the right to their own Indian culture, which I found very broad-minded and excellent at that time. And then we had papers on cityness. And Arjun gave a most wonderful paper where he was imitating John Ruskin's mornings in Florence with mornings in Delhi, where for a week he goes from one part of the city to another. And you see the vibrant colors of the marketplaces, and you have the sense of the sensory sense of the smells, the sounds, colors, and so forth. And then we had an excellent paper by Amina Aneli, who restored the tomb for the Commune, paid for by the Maharaja's descendant. And she pointed out that she was not allowed to restore the polygram. And also Rosie Llewellyn-Jones, she's part of BACSA, the British Association of Cemeteries in South Asia. And she spoke also about the memorial. And then Peter Berman, who is companion of the Guild of St. George, spoke about the Edinburgh cemeteries and his work restoring them, and how cemeteries need to be gardens, need to be places that people admire and respect for their stories and so forth. And this is Arjun, who gave us Mornings in Delhi, and he has taken his father's factory and turned it into the William Morris Red House in Delhi. And he and I did this conference together. And now we're going to interrupt this. Alexander, this is Sue, and this is Alex. We're just four of us, but that's all right, because we'll continue as a recording. And now I'm going to try to condivide schermo with the second part, which is here. And see, condividi, right. And this is the part in Delhi. And this was the cover that Arjun did. Lovely colors, and he borrowed a photograph from our cemetery of the irises, which are now in full bloom. And we did the introduction together. And then we had a paper on the lion in Florence and India, and then a paper on masculinization of motherland. Sadly, India is now being very nationalistic and sexist. And a fine paper on Ruskin and his Tuscan Sibyl, and so forth. So we'll go into that. I was also asked by Arjun to present a paper for the morning where he was doing a bookbinding conference. So this is going to be that part. What is a book? It's a primitive computer. It programs a voice in prose or poetry with phonetic symbols that can reach beyond one's present time and space. Remember, Indian books would have been on palm leaves and so forth. We have manuscript is a handcrafted book. Printed book is an industrialized book. You lose the color out of the cheapness and so forth. And my sense is the revolution must seize the printing press and become a cottage industry of electronic modes of communication. We need to use our electronic modes as if they are handcrafts and so forth. And then I wanted to go back to Siram's, Rajesh Karan's comments about the book, that it is an extension of ourselves. And so this part of the talk is on the handcrafted book, the manuscript. And here we see Brunetto dictating multiple copies in the Arabic method to Dante and Francesco, which they will then use when they are creating copies of the Commedia. And this is possibly Dante's copy of Brunetto's Tesoro, this Dante's copy possibly of Brunetto's Tesoretto. And this is Francesco da Barberino's work with the God of Love. And here is Francesco's illumination to Brunetto, a portrait of him again. And Ovid as a medieval scholar with the lectern and so forth. And medieval texts also vocalize the music. You could sing this. This is from Julian of Norwich. And here we see in Canzoniere, where you get the portrait of the poet, as if it's his voice, as if it's a Zoom box, like us today. And this is Bonagiunta da Luca, who was seeing Donne che avete in diletto d'amore in Purgatorio 24. And he's a precursor of Guido Cavalcanti and Dante Alighieri's Dolce Stil Nuova. And here I have the text on the web. And if you click on this arrow on the web, you will hear it being sung. Donne che avete and diletto. And then medieval texts like this, gold leaf, because in the candlelight they would flicker and seem to move. And then this is the Libro del Chiodo facsimile that we created, Daniel and my bookbinding teacher, Enrico Giannini. And I posed them because UNESCO asked us for photographs of conservation work in Florence. And this is Daniel Claudio Dumitrescu. And this is the cover that they made for the facsimile of the Libro del Chiodo, in which Dante is exiled, bandito of the city. And then our work also got exiled from Florence. And so his parting gift, we photographed him holding the Libro del Chiodo. He's now come back. He's the planter of all of our irises. But they were exiling him because he was begging for his family of 13 people to support. So we'd also talked about paper marbling, and which we do. And this is my granddaughter who just came in, making this 2 years ago, where you place the paper. Each time you have to do all of the paint again. Each one is unique. And then lift it to remove the excess, and you create all of these sheets of paper, which I use to bind the covers because I don't like to work in leather. It's too expensive and too difficult. Sewing the gatherings of the book. These are the ancient mode of doing it, which we would have had in medieval manuscripts. This is the Codex Amiatinus facsimile being bound. And here we also make these bookmarks with Leighton's lily stamped with a hot iron and gold leaf onto red leather. And then this is the book that came to me from Delhi through the COVID, beautifully bound, facsimile of Joseph Garrow's translation. Remember, he's the son of the Indian princess, of Dante's Vita Nova. It's a lovely edition, and it costs nothing. I really felt guilty about that. And then these are the books that we have created using these materials. We also include with them CDs with the readings. So the oral voice is coming back into the book, which would have been the medieval tradition of reading a book aloud instead of silently. And this was our edition of Elizabeth Browning's Casa Guidi windows using William Morris design and so forth. And I feel it's really important to teach young people to seize the printing press, to know how to weave websites. And these are the book's newest forms. This is our newest Gutenberg Galaxy. To use Word, which is a mess. If you go behind a Word file, you'll see it's just filled with garbage. PDF is too static. It's too much like the printed book. But HTML with JPEG and MP3, EP, file transfer protocol with the color, the sound, all of that is free. And it's extremely versatile. It's more like the codex. You scroll instead of the static codex. And then now we're finding how wonderful Zoom and PowerPoint is with MP4, that we can hear our voices and see our faces. And this website tells you how to access those programs. Sorry, this is the paper given by Maria Laura Pancini. She's from the University of Siena. She's doing her PhD, and she's talking about lions. This is the mazzocco, and then the Indian symbol of the 4 lions. And we were discussing why it is that we use this kind of categorizing system of animals for cities in Tuscany and elsewhere is heraldic. Siena has the wolf, and Pisa has the hare, and so forth. And then Francis Alexander, this was a beautiful paper by Emma Stegno, who is founding a Ruskin Center at Ca' Foscari in Venice. And she was talking about Ruskin and his Tuscan Sibyl. Francesca Alexander was a young American girl in Tuscany who really listened to the peasants, who were telling oral tales just like Diamante does. This is Beatrice, who was the teller of stories. This is the story of Santa Zita in Lucca. She really existed. She was the servant girl. When the devil was about to take a boy, she beat him with her broom and saved the boy. She gave her master's cloak to a beggar, and the beggar came back as Christ to give the cloak back to her master so she wouldn't be fired. Her bread rose even when she wasn't looking after it, and so on and so forth. And then the other story is of the gypsy who is telling, prophesying to Mary and the baby Jesus what will happen. And then we did a session on the conservation by India's diaspora, the Roma, centering on Daniel Claudio Dumitrescu, who, before Pope Francis came to bless from this pulpit, helped restore it to get it done in time, because he's so brilliant. Excellent work, but much more, he works much more quickly than do Italian restorers, who are very slow. And this is how we build our bookcases. We cut out these and put them together like Chinese boxes. And also I had Daniel make these lilied crosses, which were sort of toned down version of what you see on the bookshelves in the Bodleian Library, where my father worked as a 14-year-old orphan, and where I would go to read manuscripts. And here is Daniel crafting these from copper. He has inherited his grandfather's coppersmithing tools. His grandfather was a top coppersmith in their part of Romania. And here he is with his wife making their cradle for their baby, who was going to be born the next day. And here are the stacks I drew up for making cradles, with the Fibonacci curves of the Cardinal Bessarion's fresco in his house. And these are our cradles. And then this is the book that Daniel and Vandana wrote in 4 languages as their school textbook. And this is the names of the members of the family, man, woman, child, and father, mother, and daughter or son. His drawing of the church in Buzau and the building materials for building their homes, which they did. And then these are the participants in our alphabet school on Sundays, helping also with the gardening of the lilies of the Jajoli. This is Soita. She's a widow. She's looking at a children's Dante saying, "Che bello." Her children were in school. She is 10, Esmeralda, and she came to my computer and read perfectly from Aristotle's Justice, translated into Italian by Brunetto Latino. So brilliant. But then the Comune threw the family out because they were begging, and they went to Spain. Here they are with 2 New York University students. And here is Diamante recording her stories, like the one of the king with the 3 daughters, and the youngest one says she loves him as much as salt, so he throws her out. Shades of King Lear, all the way from India. And then how a Swedish friend of mine taught me how to make these boxes, because she had been taught by a gypsy in Göteborg in Sweden. And then I taught Daniel and Vandana how to make them, and they competed to see who could make the smallest box of all. And here we're doing the lessons taught by the two daughters of my ordinand candidate I was tutor for. The mother was Methodist. She has 5 daughters. And I was her ordinand tutor when I was an Anglican sister. And this is Mihai and Daniel learning how to chisel letters. And this is Marianne, who is Nikolai's daughter. Remember, he was the one holding the Libro del Chiodo. And she's writing the name Catherine McKinnon, who was she was born on the island of Mar, and she became in great poverty, and she became the Tsar of Russia's governess. And her descendant wanted to have a stone because the tomb is lost. And then this is the plaque Daniel made for Frederick Douglass, and this one for Sarah Parker Raymond, which we will put in Santa Maria Nuova Hospital. And so that was what I presented for the Delhi part, describing these migrants from India who lived a life of great discrimination, centuries, slavery, the Holocaust, but who have maintained the skills and the stories and how to valorize that. So now we can end that and we can discuss whatever we want. Right. That was what we did with Florence and India. And I really love the way when we do these conferences, we keep learning new things because of putting sort of like facets of a diamond together and so on. Alex and Antonia, who would like to speak first? Alex, right. Alex is in Boston. And you're on mute.
Just right. To take all of this in, if there's a pause of it is so rich, everything. And we talk a lot about how so much is vanishing, not just in contemporary culture, but within contemporary culture of a great humanist culture going way back. And every time we have our Tuesday sessions, it is restoring. And I know all of the city in the books. And when I found out what the topic was earlier about, when you were doing this, and I thought, well, that's very interesting. I'll be interested to see what Julia comes up with. Well, of course, what you've come up with is not history at a slant. You've come up with the weaving of history itself. But the nexus point is you. I am always so struck. I knew about your father and the Salt March as Gandhi. I knew about your Anglican convent school, but then to find out where you have taken all these things and continue. And I thought the Indian doctor who wrote the...
I love that.
That is extraordinary, but it's absolutely an animation of what literally where you are across the way, your library, but what you do and the way that everyone who comes, every person is a book and every person comes richer. So anyway, it just takes me a lot to just take in all that you've said. So I'm just going to leave that.
I'm afraid a lot of it was repetition.
No, it was beautiful. It's just this angles you spin. And if Emily Dickinson said the most interesting thing always, not just in poetry, but is something told at a slant, you find it a slant, but I think it's closer to what you said about a diamond, which is this refracting of facet.
Right.
I would agree absolutely. There is actually almost too much to take in.
Sorry.
But thank God.
Yes, absolutely. And because you've recorded it, and one could listen again, which would be very good.
Yes. And you're coming to it new, and this was the 32nd session. So, you know, we've sort of been dealing with this rather the same body of material, actually.
Some.
Do you do this every Tuesday?
Excuse me?
Do you do this every Tuesday?
No, every first Tuesday of the month.
Oh, well, I must make a note of that, and then I can
Right.
always.
It's always the first Tuesday of the month at 8 o'clock. And we
Okay.
haven't missed a session yet, I think. And it's been going on since COVID.
Pure oxygen every Tuesday.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. No.
Them together. I do get anxious, especially about the technology. I'm getting a bit better about that now. But it was amazing. It was wonderful that the Accademia dell'Arte del Disegno, which is Florence's oldest existing academy, they handled it beautifully, all of the electronic stuff and so on. And so we were able to record it, and the whole day in Florence, the half day in Delhi. And I loved the way that Arjun and Siram, because to them, the way we Westerners read things is wrong. It's too abstracted, too detached from what a book is. A book is a living voice.
I love the idea that everyone is a book.
Right. And my granddaughter is here. She's named Aurora. My son, who is now dead, gave her that name because of my edition of Aurora Lee of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. This is before I came to the cemetery. So she and I now are writing a book together.
Oh, wonderful.
And she's coming with me to Bologna for the book presentation of O Bella Libertà. And because I found it so healing that my parents wrote Two Lives Converge, that was in one of those slides, and dedicated to me, and I'm born at the end of that book. I feel that I used to, when I was teaching nursery school, I would bring my typewriter and have them tell me stories which I would type out, and they would illustrate. They were pre-literate, but they would go home to their parents and read the books to their parents because they'd told the story and they knew the story. And but the idea of creating a book is what Viktor Frankl talks about, logotherapy and so forth. It is an alternate universe. It's not real, but it heals reality. Makes sense. But it's what Siram is showing. This happened with Gandhi reading Ruskin and so on. And also what I loved about Rita bringing in Oscar Wilde, tomb becomes Oscar Wilde's Happy Prince. Do you remember the story? It's of a statue of a prince covered with gems. And the prince sees the city, the statue of the prince sees the city and sees the poverty, sees a young woman trying to sew the clothes in time for a party for a rich lady, sees all of these problems. So he tells the swallow to take a gem to each of these problems to help them. And in the end, there's nothing left, just the lead statue, and all of the gems are gone. And the city officials say, oh, this is rubbish, and throw it away. But this is time the prince is happy. He's given up everything. And Oscar Wilde is this extraordinary mixture. I mean, he is the aesthete who ends up being criminalized for his behavior. It's a strong moral sense. he was Ruskin's student.
Oh.
And Ruskin was talking about the importance of the moral compass. Well, that's Theodore Parker, who's buried in our cemetery. But Elizabeth Barrett Browning, George Eliot, John Ruskin, Oscar Wilde, and so forth, they're all talking about not the hierarchies of power, but the fairness, the kindness, the decency, the moral sense, and so forth. And I think they got it right. Because I think when a child reads a story like The Happy Prince, do you remember the Selfish Giant one?
No, I don't know that one.
Give Oscar Wilde's stories to children because I love them. The Selfish Giant, he has this beautiful garden. And he has a friend, and he goes and visits his friend. And they talk and talk and talk, and then he comes back. And children have broken into his garden, broken the wall, and they're playing. And meanwhile, before that, winter had come, there was snow, there was cold, everything was dead. But when the children break down the wall and play, everything comes back to life again. And the giant dies happy. And these are the sort of, well, these are the kind of stories that Diamanta tells. Will be where the third child who says she loves her father as much as salt will be the one that really loves the father, going for the simple things, which is also gospel theology. You don't sacrifice expensive animals in the temple. You just use bread and wine and water and oil for your sacraments, which are available in any kitchen. And so possible for the poor to have religion. Sue, can you unmute yourself and make a comment? You're part of my family. Sue is my son's elder son's friend. Yes. Right. Now we can.
I'm just enjoying listening. Thank you. I got to see your grandchildren.
Was it all right? Sorry. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
I'm just saying, I'm just enjoying listening. And happy belated birthday.
Right. Do you have a headache?
Oh, can you see me?
Yes.
I thought I was blocked. Yeah, I'm resting. I work late. I don't go to sleep until 4 a.m. So
yes.
yeah, I just didn't want to miss it because it sounds, from what you had brought up in the last one, the Indian conference was good. Okay, well, I'm going to try to block myself next time.
Yes, we did a preview, right? I've never gone to India, and I would have loved to have seen India, but certainly it was surrounding me anyway, right?
A friend of mine, Julie. Oh, go ahead, Sue.
Oh no, I'm finished. I'm sorry.
Alex.
A friend of mine who was born in Mumbai, who came to then graduate school at Yale, who I've spoken about her before to you, Julia. She's somebody who has gone all over the world setting up clinics for women and children. And she recently went back to India just to make a visit to her family. And her mother was one of the most famous educators in India. And I asked her, I said, oh, if you happen to go, could you find a little Ganesha statue, a little tiny one? And they're nowhere to be found. Because, and I said, why is it? So with this uber nationalist government. And she said it has become so divisive. It's like being in this country, that they will have nothing to, because it might look like it's supporting Modi. And so you
Oh,
cannot find these.
right. Mm-hmm.
So she got me a little tiny notebook with one of the Hindu goddesses. And but she said you can't find them, at least in Mumbai, you know. And I thought, there it is, this erasing. And if you know,
Yes. It's a terrible backlash, isn't it?
it's a terrible backlash, and English has become the kind of language of capitalism, which is taking over, you know. And so it's a sort of very dispiriting time, which is why the first Mondays and first Tuesdays in the month are always such a joy.
I shall make a point of joining you for the first Tuesday. Because it is, there's just so much, Julie, darling. It's so rich, it's so wonderful. It's kind of like a continuation of our talks.
Yes, right. And
Yeah.
also, I have an Irish friend. She's lovely, Bridget. And she comes and we talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. Mainly about things Irish and spiritual things and so forth. But she has gone and talked with the Irish embassy, and they have lots of funds. And she's explaining to them, and they've agreed with her, that St. Patrick is always celebrated, but why not celebrate St. Bridget of Ireland?
Absolutely.
And St. Bridget has a real presence here in Florence, Santa Lucia and so forth. And so she's working on this for the next year. And I think it will really be, the story of St. Bridget is wonderful, because it's, you know, it's also about the priesting of women and everything else. And this idea of the cloak. And I've now got to give a paper at the Certosa about, because also St. Bridget of Ireland and Santa Birgitta of Sweden said that Birgitta plays off the likenesses to Bridget. And she has the most terrifying vision when Nicholas Acciaioli, who was very, very corrupt, I forget, seneschal of Naples, and became filthy rich and built this huge monastery to save his soul. And as he's dying, Bridget is there, Birgitta is there by his side. And she has this vision of the Madonna with her cloak, and all the monks of the Certosa praying for Nicholas's soul. And this touch and go. She also has a very similar vision about her son, who was Charles, who was really, I mean, he had a love affair with the Queen Giovanna of Naples, and so on and so forth. And he would go before the Pope with the belt full of bells. And he was really embarrassing his mother enormously by behaving so badly. Well, he goes and dies on her, and she's praying for his soul in the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And the devil comes with a huge, well, no, the devil says, he's mine. She says, well, can you tell us his sins? I can't remember. And he says, but I've got them all in this sack. And she says, well, open the sack. And it's empty. And I read that at Jonathan's funeral, the edition I did of Birgitta. Because Jonathan, he was wonderful. He ran everybody's kitchen in New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. But he was a drug addict from used, and a problem child, but wonderful. And it just felt right reading that text at his funeral. You know, it's Daniel cooked yesterday an enormous fish he caught up the Arno. And today he cooked chicken with ginger. And so we're really being spoiled. I can smell the chicken with ginger being warmed up right now by a
I'm on my way. I'm on my way over.
Yes, me too.
right. So, what's your news, Alex?
Not this Saturday, and then the following week will be in New York because Oswald, my husband, has been doing for an entire year, raising a lot of money and doing international events against the genocide in Ukraine, because he comes from a family of Ukrainian intellectuals who fled and who themselves were rescuers in Ukraine. And so that is what's been happening. It's just sort of, and Julia, will send you a couple of the books that have come out that are from voices there, which are extraordinary, but it is a genocide going on. And we only have one friend, the novelist Oksana Abushko, who is one of the most prominent writers in Ukraine, and she's the only person who left, and she's now in Warsaw because she's been on Putin's kill list for so long. And when Crimea was invaded in 2014, she was asked by the EU to come give a talk on International Women's Day, and she said something about, and this is in 2014, about Putin essentially being a war criminal, and they turned off her mic and they did not send around a transcription. So this time on International Women's Day, she was allowed back, and she said, I tried to warn you, in 2014, she said, and that was the day when she did this on International Women's Day. That was the day that the maternity hospital, the infamous, bombing, and that infamous photograph of the woman on the stretcher who died with the baby. So that's why this household, this is
under enormous stress and trauma.
Yeah, and it will not stop, I don't think, until Putin's no longer with us.
Right. Yeah, I'm afraid I agree.
Yeah, I mean, but these people, there's extraordinary, so many international pen and all sorts of sessions where these young poets and publishers, they just, without any kind of feeling of victimization, will just say, if it's a little noisy, just excuse me, bombs are dropping right now, but I'm now going to read from my new book. They're extraordinary.
Yes. Yes. Alex is in Boston and Antonia is in Germany. And whereabouts I should remember.
About 20 miles up in the hills behind Frankfurt.
Right. What is the sense in Germany of the war in Ukraine?
Everybody condemns it, but they're actually not doing very much about it.
Exactly. But Germany has actually taken in a fair amount of Ukrainians.
They have taken a lot of refugees, yes.
Okay.
That's true. Whereas England is being particularly
England's impossible
about it. But no, Germany has taken in a lot. But they're dithering about sending arms because
Yes,
have restrictions about being armed and sending arms and being seen to send arms and. But no, I'm afraid, Alex, you're quite right. As long as Putin is around, it's not going to stop.
It's not going to.
It's a nice sort of. It is Putin. It's not Russia.
That's true. That's true. A lot of Russians have left. A lot of them have.
Those that know, but so many Russians haven't got a clue what is going on because
No,
it's
right.
propaganda.
Right.
They unfortunately believe what they're told, and very, very many of them think it's a justifiable war.
Right.
Because of
it's
the propaganda they get. Right.
Yes.
not just, but Putin's extraordinarily dark, romantic version of Russia.
Right. Mhm.
Uh,
No, it's horrible. I mean, it's Modi's version.
yes, yes, and we're all, yes, this is a very bad time, And as Julia knows, I was in Italy during Italy's last election with Meloni, and just this time, it's literally unthinkable. Some of the people who are currently in power,
Mm,
Mm.
absolutely.
But I've been finding, I was proud of the cemetery for its abolitionists.
Oh, for everything.
But when I worked on this and saw how much of the East India Company, 42 burials are East India Company retirees. And it is a dark stain.
Mm.
And, it's very difficult now with Charles's coronation. And sort of realizing, we weren't able to take the case to Strasbourg of the 4 Roma children because they've got no funds with COVID, Brexit, and Ukraine. They're not doing human rights. There isn't money for human rights cases. And it is a dark time. But it was such a relief to realize I could do that conference on Florence and India.
Mhm.
The Academia housed us for free and did all of the technical work for free. It didn't cost anything. And that's thanks to Zoom. So that there are some, now to communicate.
Yes, and in fact, oddly, we have to thank COVID for Zoom.
Exactly.
Right. No,
Yes, it existed before, but I mean,
the mother of invention.
yeah, but it has made keeping in touch with people and talking to people.
Yes.
Because there's a whole difference between talking to somebody when you just hear them or talking to them when you see them.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And this is what Zoom has made possible.
Yes. Yes.
That, and I think COVID, I think for anybody, like any of us with a very strong inner life, it was wonderful. It was a kind of way in which everyone on the planet had the choice of, do you want to
become a hermit?
no, do you want to deepen interior life,
Yes.
And then Zoom was a way to talk about the kind of changes that people were feeling, So many people in this country left their high-paying jobs to do what they really loved, or left their marriages or whatever they did. But, COVID was a very interesting period. Yes.
And now
Yes.
almost no masks anywhere. So.
No.
Not here.
Here in Germany, occasionally, because COVID is still actually very prevalent here. But if you go into a supermarket, you wear a mask.
You do.
Into a crowded place, you wear a mask. Yeah, you don't
Really?
have to,
Yeah.
but people do.
Is it still a fairly high numbers in terms of?
Yeah, it is. It is here.
But is it presumably? I imagine with Germany, there are high vaccination rates.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's milder versions of COVID if anybody gets it.
Yes, the death rate is not talked about because it's hardly countable.
Yeah.
But the incidence of COVID infections is still quite high. Yeah. Right.
Do you want to say something?
Me?
Yes. Sue.
A huge thank you.
Okay, right. Right. So, shall we say, as a,
Here I am. Am I
yes,
blocked? No. Okay.
now
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Well, I'm living in northern Philadelphia, well, north of Philadelphia, and there's a large Ukrainian population here. And I was standing in line at the supermarket, a woman behind me and a woman in front of me was trying to use some kind of card and it was having difficulty. So we started talking. She had big bags of coleslaw. And I was like, oh, what are you doing with that? And we started talking. And she said, in my country, Soviet Union. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't question where in the Soviet Union or, why she used the term. So then she checks out. And she dropped her keys. So I said, oh, this is a chance for me to talk to her. I said, oh, exactly where were you in the Soviet Union? She told me Ukraine. And then I just started, like crying. I don't know what happened inside of me. I just started crying. I said, somebody's got to kill that guy. And then she said, yes, it's just so much of my family have been suffering. And I was like, ugh. And I heard that he had cancer, and some of the comedians said, I never thought I would say it, but go cancer. It's just like, I don't understand. But I would be interested in knowing what you're doing in New York and if there's any kind of solutions that are.
We're very glad to pass this on through Julia. There's something in New York on the 13th, which is held in the Ukrainian Museum, which is directly across from the Metropolitan Museum on Fifth Avenue. And it's put together, my husband Askell, but by some of leading poets in this country, like Carolyn Porcher and people who put together incredible anthology. It's going to be like Julia's The City in the Book. But and in many ways, but be glad to pass it on, Sue, to you via Julia. Okay.
Thank
Just
you.
Sounds
And-
great.
Keep up the good work.
Yes. And Laura, who normally is with us, she's doing a big concert with the Ukrainian music and so forth. Ukrainians in her part. And just the other day, the Russian Orthodox priest came, Father George, and he blessed all of the Russian tombs, some of which are Ukrainian here in this cemetery. And they're doing a poetry reading in support of Ukraine.
Askell, my husband, has done this thing that he realized that the one thing he could do as a writer and in his case, a professor, was that all of these writers and publishers have lost their jobs. They have no incomes. So he and others here have put together a whole thing of raising money for temporary salaries for people. But I just want to say to Sue's point about Putin and the woman you ran into in the supermarket. So I was in Bologna in September with a very, very old good friend who is a neuroscientist and a doctor. And we were watching, there was a picture of Putin that flashed, and I said, Paula, what is it about his face? His face is very distended. And she said, he is probably on prostate medication, but not for, and there could be real problems with the prostate, which of course would be appropriate for him. But so maybe his health is not so good. I don't know, but she just looked at the face and knew what kind of medication he was on. Vediamo.
Yes, I've been talking with Aurora, walking through the streets of Florence, about Corso Donati, who was so criminal, who caused Dante's exile and Guido's death. And there are these people who abuse power, do terrible harm.
Just look at your news feed now, if you dare. So it's like, yes.
So how can we find something to end on which would be more positive?
What was one of your takeaways, Julia? Your favorite parts from The City in the Book, this most recent?
It's all collapsing together into a black hole at the moment, because here I am preparing also for the reading in Bologna for the Barrett Browning. And it's sort of clashing. You know, I'm sort of having these files on my computer screen, and every now and then they get a bit muddled up. But I'm trying to remember. There's a poem at the end of my paper. I'm going to give one of my own poems at the end, and it is translated into Italian. And the first voice is Beatrice. She flees her mother's hatred and comes to Ravenna, where she becomes a nun amidst Ravenna's desolate. Second verse is, we are Milton's daughters, forbidden Greek, Latin, Hebrew, who write down his hellish vision in eternal silence. I'm not reciting it properly. And the third one is, I fled my father's anger. Florence's sunlight. And in Casaguidi, I hear, oh, bella libertà. And that is the title of anthology of the poetry of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And I'm so grateful that Jonathan called his baby daughter Aurora.
Yes, it's a lovely memory and a lovely gift, really.
Yes. My children sort of had to reject me to win their father's approval, but they sort of secretly sort of let me know that they didn't. I mean, Richard called his son Robin Bolton, which was my father's name. That made my husband really angry. Richard was courageous about doing that. And Jonathan with Aurora. Never forget seeing them together the first time I just got off the plane. There he was with this new baby. And my son with the red copper red beard and blue eyes. And Aurora has exactly the same eyes.
Oh, lovely.
Yes.
I love the idea that you're going to be going to Bologna together. Have you been to Bologna for a while?
No, I don't know Bologna well. I just went to look for manuscripts.
So just to tell you that, because Bologna is the next sort of in terms of transport in Italy and going down all the way down like to Puglia. So the new train station in Bologna is like an airport. It's on 3 levels. And so just to know that you want to give yourself a little time because it takes a little navigation. And if you you're not going to need it, but I'm very happy to give you or to tell my friend Paola that you're there if you ever need anything. You're just there for a day?
Yes, it's just Friday. The talk is at 6 o'clock. And she says it's 10 minutes walk from the station to...
Yes, but you need good time to get through the station.
Exactly.
But it is confusing.
Right. So it's just, I was taking a train back to Rome, and really I had to plan the night before where to get the taxi to go, and there had been a taxi strike going on too. So
this is my granddaughter.
Hi.
She's from right. She's been in the Chianti today. Yes.
Hi, Aurora. How are you? I've always heard about you.
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I can't see you now. Where'd you go? Oh, there you are. Oh, how long are you there for?
2 weeks.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. See the family resemblance. I can see the resemblance between.
And those are my son's eyes, not mine. They're lovely.
But Aurora, take care of Julia. She's very precious.
Yes, she is.
exactly.
Aurora's very precious. Right?
Well, together, take care of each other because you're both
Yes,
precious.
Yes.
And take time, as Justin said, take a little time in the train station in Bologna because it takes a little while.
okay. I love the Milan station. All of that marble. I had to sleep there with a Roma mother and a newborn baby and another baby on that hard marble all night. Trying to get the papers from the consulate. But the architecture is extraordinary in Milan. Do you remember?
Mhm.
Huge marble arches.
I didn't like it, but
Well, I spent all night watching, the shapes of that building, thinking how they crafted it and so forth. But I don't like modern buildings.
It was lovely to meet you all.
Yes.
Yes, it was.
So we'll
Have a great time.
say
Thank you.
good night. And I haven't really thought of what to do next month.
I wonder if you want to do something about the strange odyssey of the foreigner. We've done this in some extent, but the foreigner in Florence, I'm thinking of Bridget in Fiesole and
that would be lovely.
and these wonderful little things, how, and who was it in Fiesole that was her brother who came that all of a sudden was made the bishop in Fiesole?
That's right. That's San Donatus.
San Donato.
Yes. And that's rather like Bridget being made a bishop, remember, in Ireland. They put a cloak over her and consecrate her bishop as a bishop. And I loved that story. But for the Certosa talk, I have to gather together all of these images. That will be the one. Madonna of Mercy, with all the people under her cloak.
Mm.
That
Yeah.
talk about next time. Right. So we should end this and let the process itself. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
all of everybody.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
It's nice
Look
meeting
forward
you.
to the next one.
Yes. Okay. Right.
We talk in between, okay?
Yes, definitely.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Sue.
Bye.
Bye, Alex.
No.